Hi, I'm Deb Saxon, AIPAC's Deputy Director for Policy and Government Affairs. Thank you all for joining us for a conversation with two great friends of the U.S. Israel relationship. Representative Elaine Luria, a Democrat from Virginia, and Representative Michael Waltz, a Republican from Florida. They're both U.S. veterans. Together they serve on the House Armed Services Committee, and they've also traveled to Israel with AIEF, the charitable organization affiliated with AIPAC. Thank you both so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So let's just jump right in. I want to start with, this month we are celebrating Veterans Day, and, thank you so much for your service to our country as veterans.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
So I want to ask both of you, how do you think your military service influenced your life path and led you to Congress today? Maybe, Congresswoman, we can start with you.
Sure. Well, thank you also for having us, and it's great to serve with Mike. And I think as veterans, there's a lot we have in common, so it makes it easier to work together in the halls of Congress. But I viewed serving my community, serving in the U.S. Congress as a continuation of my service. I started when I was 17 at the U.S. Naval Academy and then served for 20 years. And I felt that there was more I could do for my community, for our country, and this was a way to continue to serve.
Amazing. Congressman?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I've served all over the world as a Army Special Forces officer, as a Green Beret, but I did it in the reserve component, and so my day job for many years was actually in the Bush administration, in the White House under Secretaries Rumsfeld and Gates, and then eventually with Vice President Cheney as his counterterrorism advisor. And I saw that often that disconnect between the intent of the President of the United States or the policy and then what was actually happening on the ground, and that back and forth, and that often the men and women out on the ships, the planes, the front lines weren't getting what they deserve, frankly, from Washington. So like Elaine, I saw this as a continuation of service, but really I'm motivated day in and day out, and I'm really thrilled to work with her on the Armed Services Committee to get those soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, the support, the training, the doctrine, and the resources, which importantly come from the Congress, that they deserve to keep this great nation free.
So beyond even just the defense and military issues, it seems that military veterans that serve in Congress are often the more sort of consistent bipartisan members of Congress as well. And so why do you think that's the case? Congressman, maybe start with you.
Well, I think, look, to be blunt about it, I think if we were willing to die for that flag, then we'll be willing to roll up our sleeves and take the tough votes or do the tough compromises, or even kind of get over it when we really fundamentally disagree with something to move the country forward. When we have that commonality of service, when at the earliest age we were taught leadership and followership and discipline, and I think Elaine would agree with me, when you're deployed, nobody cares about race or religion or socioeconomic background, or they certainly don't care about political party. It's about mission, it's about country, it's about getting the job done. And that same ethos, she and I disagree on all kinds of issues. But it's that ethos that we bring to this service, and we know the stakes if we don't get it right. And I think that is some of the main drivers of why we figure out ways to come together.
And I'd echo what Mike said. I think it's about mission. So I think about when I deployed, I had the opportunity to deploy 6 different times on ships. And one of those deployments was on an aircraft carrier, and we were simultaneously launching strikes into Iraq and Afghanistan against terrorist targets. And my job was to operate the 8 nuclear reactors on the aircraft carrier. I didn't turn to the reactor operator next to me and say, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? The truth is that we had a mission to accomplish, and we were all there for the same purpose. And I think that, whether our service in the military was at sea or a Green Beret on land or in the Air Force, we are used to that idea of having a common mission to accomplish. And so I think when we sit down in an Armed Services Committee hearing, we're marking up a massive defense bill, we're thinking about those people who are out there on the front line or on our ships at sea. And we have the same goal, like Mike said, to provide them the resources they need, the training, and make sure that they have the right equipment and tools to defend our nation.
So you're both part of this caucus, which maybe you could explain to us what a caucus is within Congress, but this For Country Caucus, bipartisan group of members, all military veterans serving. What is the point of this caucus? Tell us a little bit about it if you can.
Sure. Well, I'll start out by describing what a caucus is. There's lots of caucuses that, we're a group of members who share a common interest or want to work on a common issue area come together. So the For Country Caucus, the goal of that one is the background of every member on that caucus is that they're a veteran and they're willing to work in a bipartisan way. And this group, we come together and we focus a lot on issues that have to do with veterans and military families and public service, not just in the military, but public service in other ways. And, one of the things we focused on is the readiness of youth to enter the military and, other means of public service that we could make available to young people because we think that's really important. Again, that common thread, people sharing that experience, I think makes better citizens. And so, this group, we come from around the country, all the services, different ages, people who are new to Congress, people who've been here for a long time. But the fact that we're all veterans brings us together to try to focus on a core group of issues that, we think as veterans in Congress, we can help promote and elevate their importance because we also have the shared experience of those issues related to service.
Yeah, as Elaine said, there's a caucus for everything, right? There's a road builders caucus, there's an affordable housing caucus. Literally for everything. Some are much more active than others. Why this one I think is especially unique is we also take a pledge as part of the caucus, and we take a pledge to civility, which I think is incredibly important these days.
Wow, yeah.
It's a little sad we have to do that, but it is important. But importantly too, there's always a political component to everything that we do, and we've made a pledge to not, for lack of a better term, kind of go after each other outside of the walls of Congress when politics comes to play. And that's important in that we can sit down and truly have honest, candid conversations, and we're not worried about how, is that going to be used against us in some way. So I think that makes it a bit different. And again, Congress now has gone from in the 1970s, 3/4 were veterans. So 3/4 of the House and Senate had served. Now we're hovering around 16 to 18%. It's a record low in our nation's history. And I think it explains a lot of our record amount of dysfunction right now, honestly, because most of Congress doesn't have that commonality of serving their country before they come here and being willing to put their life on the line, but yet everybody in this caucus has. And I think that those combination of things brings a very different flavor. And we've been able to come together and get a lot of important things done.
Yeah, well, first of all, it really does sound like a unique kind of grouping of members and mission. And clearly the two of you, this is not just theory, you actually take this very literally, and you have created a lot of action, including one of the AIPAC legislative initiatives on our legislative agenda is a bill that the two of you wrote and are leading in Congress right now, the U.S. Israel PTSD Research Collaboration Act, such an important piece of legislation. Would love to know from the two of you how you came to work together on this particular issue, why you think this is an issue where there's really a need for partnership, and sort of what this will mean. So maybe Congresswoman, can you start?
Sure. So, I think that we talked about things that we share as values and things that we agree on. And I would say that, there's very strong bipartisan support for the U.S. Israel relationship, and that's a place that we have common ground, and also as veterans. So the idea that we could bring the expertise, both from within Israel and the U.S. to cooperate and collaborate on research for PTSD. We are obviously aware within Israel, the many people, not only soldiers, but communities who can suffer from PTSD because of dangerous attacks and missile attacks and just the day-to-day sort of danger and fear that people live in. unfortunately, there's many U.S. Troops who've deployed overseas to Iraq and Afghanistan, for example, who suffer from PTSD. And we want to make sure that we can bring the best knowledge, the best research from both of our countries to work together to help people suffering from PTSD. And so it's great to be able to work with Mike as a fellow veteran, and anything we can do to help our veterans. And I think that this is a perfect cooperation. And I'll let you talk a little bit more.
Well, we have to get our arms around this scourge. We're losing more soldiers to suicide than we are in combat. It's just unacceptable. And on top of that, the VA, the Department of VA, and the U.S. government continues to pour more and more billions and throw money at the problem, yet we have that same unacceptable result of 20 to 22 a day that are dying for years now. I mean, the VA's budget is almost tripled. And I know they're doing a lot of great work, but I think we need to also do things differently. And certainly our friends and partners in the IDF have had their fair share of combat experiences. There is some great research that's happening in Israel, and what this bill is designed to do is to have the various institutions and our government and outside as well be incentivized to collaborate and work together. And let's come together and share and figure out better pathways to get at this, because currently what we're doing isn't working. And I think in terms of us coming together, I believe it was AIPAC that brought us together on this, and has really been a driving force, has been incredibly helpful in gathering support both in the House and the Senate. And I think this year we're going to get it done. We have to get it done. And I just wanted to add one more thing back to the For Country Caucus and ways that we come together. I think it was really amazing to me. I think it was 2019, in the middle of Mueller hearings and impeachment and just all the divisiveness that was going on the Hill, that caucus and we all came together at like 6:30 in the morning at the Vietnam Memorial Wall and joined the Park Service and washed the wall together.
And more recently, we did the care packages.
That's right. We all came together and all sent care packages. One of our members, Jason Crow, and I jumped together over Normandy for the 75th anniversary of D-Day.
Wow.
Those things may seem kind of symbolic, but I think Americans need to see that. All they see if you turn on cable news is us yelling at each other. Well, they need to see us also coming together, whether it's for the U.S. Israel PTSD bill or in ways like that, that even though it doesn't always make the news, we do come together quite a lot to get legislation like this and other things done. There's a lot getting done, but cable news sells drama, right?
Yeah. And one of the things that I think Mike was talking about, the news and what you see in the headlines that is often overlooked is all the work that we do on the Armed Services Committee. And it's incredibly bipartisan, and I think that as we talked as veterans and members of that committee, we come with a goal and a purpose to make sure that our troops, our sailors, have the training, have the equipment that they need to defend the country. And just looking at this year's defense bill, I led an effort from the Democratic side. We came together across the aisle and we added additional resources, an additional $25 billion to the defense budget, really to ensure that we have the resources and tools necessary to confront an increasingly aggressive China, for example. And we're strongly committed to the MOU and making sure that we provide the resources to Israel for security defense, missile defense, and had an overwhelmingly bipartisan vote, over 400 members supporting the replenishment of Iron Dome for an additional $1 billion. So, it's unfortunate that the things that we work together on don't make as many of the headlines as some of the things that might be more fleeting and confrontational in the news.
Yeah, no, we really do notice that kind of reaching across the aisle and that working together, and it's not just heartwarming, it's so necessary.
Yeah.
We really appreciate it. Both of you have traveled to Israel with AIEF, the charitable organization affiliated with AIPAC. And I'd love to know from each of you sort of what are some of those firsthand experiences that you had a chance to see up close, and also what do you bring back after a trip like that? What
Yeah.
do you bring back to your communities, Congressman?
You know, it was just a wonderful trip, and I was able to take my mother, who's in her 70s, and you know, in her mind, she just thought it would be like what she had seen kind of growing up on the news in the 70s and 80s, and Intifada, and you know, and just violence and discord everywhere. And so she just kind of seeing it through her eyes, on what an amazing city Tel Aviv is, to go to the old city in Jerusalem, to see kind of startup nation, the vineyards in the north. It was an incredible trip, but the one visit that sticks out for me was we visited one of the Iron Dome command centers, and received probably one of the best briefings. And with 25 years in the military, I've received a lot. One of the best briefings I've ever received from an IDF major who walked us through, you know, how he makes split-second decisions, what batteries go where, if they run out of the anti-missile missiles, then he has to decide what cities get hit based on what bunkers, you know, what infrastructure's in place. It was incredible. And one of the members asked, it was a little bit awkward, but asked him how old he was. And I think he was 23 or 24. Wow. And then she said, "You clearly have an amazing future in the military." And he said, "Actually, ma'am, I just turned in my paperwork and I've already started my own business." Right? And he was already launching into Startup Nation. And for me, that really exemplified in many ways why national service is so important, why having skin in the game is so important, but also the skill sets that at such a young age that you walk away with. So it was just an incredible trip, and to do it with, I don't know, it was like 80, 90 members on both sides of the aisle. So any opportunity we have to come together outside of Washington and get to know each other and then do it in the context of that trip was really incredible. It was great.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah.
Congresswoman, what about you?
Yes, well, I also had an incredible experience traveling to Israel with AIEF. I was able to go on a very small bipartisan trip. There were 6 members, and it was right before we were sworn in to our first term in Congress. And it was an ability to see and, you know, see up close the things that, you know, we talk about and that we're working on through our work in Congress. And I think that what stood out to me the most was standing at the border with Lebanon, and understanding, you know, the threat that people live under every day. The Hezbollah has 150,000 rockets aimed right at people, and they go through their daily lives, you know, to walk their children to school or the park, or you know, go, you know, do all of the daily things like get groceries. Yet at any split second, you know, they're in danger. And the fact that it's so incredibly important that we work with Israel for the self-defense, they're our strongest ally in the Middle East, that, you know, we continue to provide these resources for Iron Dome. And it's really palpable when you're there and you look across what looks like a peaceful hillside across the border and know that in those buildings someone could open the shutters and there's a rocket launcher there that could, you know, your children could be playing in the park and they could be in danger. And understanding, you know, the fear with which, you know, people, you know, live in that circumstance, and how important it is that we maintain this relationship with Israel in order to, you know, protect our closest ally.
Yeah,
I have to say too, standing on the Golan Heights, right, and just, it's one thing to read about and, you know, read about those heroic battles, but standing there and understanding how dominant that terrain is and looking, you know, across the valley both ways, makes me appreciate why I would never give it back. I mean, it's just that strategic, it's that key. So there's nothing like walking the ground, right, and seeing it firsthand.
Yeah. And we look forward to going back. We were planning a bipartisan trip of members of the Armed Services Committee, and due to challenges with, you know, COVID restrictions, we've had to push that out to sometime in the future. But we're really looking forward to having the opportunity to travel again, and hopefully with a, you know, a group of members, you know, really focused on national security through the Armed Services Committee. So, you know, really appreciate AIF's, you know, support in educating and allowing, you know, members of Congress to see firsthand the things that have really made a big impression on us and the work that we do.
It's so important.
Yeah.
You know, I want to close with one final question, sort of a broader question, but also a bit personal. which is it's so obvious you are both so committed to the U.S. Israel relationship and strengthening it in Congress. How do you ever get asked, why is this important? Why is this an American value? Why is this necessary? What do you answer, Congressman?
Yeah, it really comes down to our values, and that Israel is so unique in the neighborhood in which it's sitting. The basic freedoms and human rights that often, frankly, we take for granted. Freedom of the press, freedom of religion, freedom to chart your own future, freedom of speech, that we often take for granted here in the United States, is constantly under threat there in Israel, and is literally just a few miles away from being taken. Fortunately now, with the great leaps that we've made with the Abraham Accords and other advances that Israel has made with its neighbors, that's not as much the case. But you still have the Iranian regime, you still have Hamas, you still have the thousands of rockets sitting with Hezbollah up in Lebanon, and we just can't ever take our eye off the ball. Because if we allow those values to be exterminated there, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in Taiwan, we cannot let authoritarianism and we can't let terror ever win the day. And that's why that's why we have to, I think, for the future of our children or our grandchildren, remain as close as ever.
Congresswoman, what about you?
Yes, well, I guess I'd share an experience that I had early on in Congress, and it was shocking to me in the sense that I wouldn't have to do this, and at this point it was 2019. Literally the first time that I stood up and spoke on the House floor was to stand up and speak against anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism levied against claims of dual loyalty from other colleagues of ours in the House. And that was very challenging. A lot of people have come up to me and said that that was very courageous that you did that. I mean, I didn't think twice. I mean, I pointed out the fact, dual loyalty. This is crazy. Is it not enough that I served 20 years in uniform and that my husband served 27 years in uniform? And kind of went through my dedication and commitment to our country, but. There's a very disturbing, movement and trend that, we see a lot of anti-Semitism. It's tied in with, anti-Israel sentiment. It's growing on our college campuses. And, circling back to a point of bipartisanship, I mean, in the last administration, I was at the White House standing behind the president when he signed an executive order against anti-Semitism on college campuses. And so this is an issue where, regardless of, difference in views on so many issues, that I think we still truly do come together to make sure that we support the U.S. Israel relationship. We stand up against anti-Semitism in addition to other forms of hate and bigotry, but truly the fact that this is something that we have to confront head on, and it's great to have partners like Mike and my other colleagues to work together on these issues.
Well, this has been just such a rich conversation with the two of you. I want to again thank you so much for your profound service to our country and for your leadership in Congress today and for joining us.